Most CEOs build empires, but Bob Walker was cleaning up the ashes of his. An old man slammed his fork down. "Bob Walker," he snapped, "your grandma would be ashamed of you." Bob's eyes fell to the plate. The sausage lay burned black edges, curling. A sour, rotten smell rose from the greasy meat. His chest tightened. For a moment he saw his grandma's smile, the way she taught him to grind fresh pork with care. He looked up at the security camera above the counter. Someone had destroyed Southern Bites. Someone had turned his family's pride into trash. He clenched his jaw. This wasn't just bad food. This was betrayal. Bob sat alone in his office. The room smelled like old wood and cold coffee. On the shelf beside him was a black and white photo. His grandma stood in her tiny kitchen, hands deep in ground pork. Her eyes sparkled behind thick glasses. She wore an apron stained with spices. Bob reached out and touched the glass frame. He remembered her voice so clearly. "Quality isn't a recipe, Bobby. It's a promise." His throat tightened. He closed his eyes for a moment. Southern Bites wasn't just a business. It was her life's work. It was his childhood. It was their family name. Now her recipe was burned rotten and mocked by customers. He felt shame burn in his chest. Someone had broken that promise, and Bob knew he was the only one who could fix it. 3. Bob closed his eyes. A memory pulled him back. He was 8 years old, standing on a wooden stool beside his grandma. The kitchen smelled of pepper and garlic. She handed him a chunk of pork. "Feel it, Bobby," she said softly. "Good meat is firm, not slimy." He laughed as his small hands pressed into the cold meat. Fat squished between his fingers. He wrinkled his nose. She chuckled, wiping sweat from her brow. "You'll get used to it, boy. One day you'll run this place." He looked up at her eyes wide with pride. "Really, Grandma?" She smiled. "Really?" Bob opened his eyes in the office. Her words echoed in his chest like a prayer. This wasn't just sausage, it was her legacy, and he would not let anyone destroy it. 4. Bob turned to his laptop. The screen glowed in the dark office. He opened the email folder marked Complaints. Lines of bold text filled the list. He clicked the first one. A customer wrote in all caps, "Southern Bites is trash now. Your sausage used to taste like real food. Now it's rubber and grease." Bob felt a stab in his chest. His eyes moved to the next email. "My family ate your food for generations. I will never come back." He exhaled slowly. Each word cut deeper than a knife. He scrolled again. More complaints, more anger, more betrayal. His fingers trembled on the mouse. He closed the laptop. The silence of the office pressed against his ears. Something was rotting inside Southern Bites, and tomorrow he would find it. 5. Bob stood and walked to the coat rack. He slipped off his dark blue suit jacket. The fabric felt heavy in his hands. He hung it beside his grandma's photo on the wall. For a moment he stared at her smiling face. "I won't let them destroy what you built," he whispered. He opened the bottom drawer of his cabinet. Inside lay an old Southern Bites uniform, faded brown shirt, orange apron, black cap. He pulled the shirt over his crisp white dress shirt. He tied the apron tight around his waist. He adjusted the cap low over his eyes. His heart thumped in his chest. Tomorrow no one would see a CEO. They would see a new dishwasher. Bob took a deep breath. This was no longer about business. This was war for his family's name. 6. Bob knelt on the greasy kitchen floor. His knees ached against the cold tiles. He dipped a rag into the bucket of soapy water. Oil stains smeared across the ground. He heard heavy footsteps behind him. A sudden kick knocked the bucket over. Water splashed across his chest and face. He looked up. Kevin Harris stood above him, arms crossed. Kevin wore a black manager's polo. A smirk curled across his lips. "Move faster, old man," Kevin snapped. "This floor isn't going to clean itself." Bob clenched the rag in his hand. His knuckles turned white. Kevin shook his head and walked away. His shoes left wet prints on the clean floor. Bob took a slow breath. His heart pounded with rage, but he lowered his eyes and kept scrubbing. They saw him as nothing. That was good, because they wouldn't see him coming. 7. Bob pushed the mop across the kitchen floor. His shoulders burned with every stroke. Behind him he heard voices. Brian Miller stood near the fryer, arms folded. He wore a silver name tag that read, Regional Manager. Kevin leaned against the counter beside him. Both men watched Bob mop. Brian chuckled under his breath. "Look at that old guy," he said. "Bet he can't even lift a sausage box." Kevin smirked. "He's useless. Faster to hire a robot." Brian shook his head. "Bob Walker built this place," he said. His voice dripped with sarcasm. "But now, he's just an empty legend." Bob kept his eyes on the floor. He gripped the mop handle so hard his fingers ached. Brian turned away, laughing softly. "Southern Bites doesn't need old heroes," he whispered to Kevin. "It needs real men who can make money." Bob swallowed the bitter taste in his mouth. He kept cleaning, but inside, a storm was building. 8. Bob wiped his hands on his apron. He stepped out to the dining area with a tray of sausages. 2 women sat at the corner table. One wore a red cardigan. The other had gray hair tied in a bun. He placed their plates down gently. "Here you go, ma'am. Enjoy your meal." They barely looked at him. He turned to leave, but heard their voices. The woman in red leaned closer. "Smell that," she whispered. "It's sour. Like old meat." The other woman frowned. Ever since Bob Walker got old, this place went downhill. Bob froze mid-step. His heart thudded in his chest. They didn't know he was standing there. They didn't know he was Bob Walker. He forced himself to keep walking. Each word stabbed deep into his chest. At the counter, he clenched the edge so hard his knuckles turned white. If the customers could taste rot, then what else was hiding behind his kitchen doors? 9 Bob stacked trays behind the counter. His arms ached from carrying heavy dishes. Mark Peterson walked in. His navy suit looked sharp under the bright kitchen lights. A silver badge on his chest read, Regional Operations Director. He glanced at Bob with cold eyes. "You, dishwasher." Bob turned, keeping his face blank. "Yes, sir." Mark pointed to the back hallway. "Freezer's a mess. Boxes everywhere. Clean it up before your shift ends." Bob nodded. "Yes, sir." Mark leaned closer. His cologne smelled like expensive wood. "And hurry," he whispered. "We have inspectors coming this week. Don't screw it up." He turned and walked away without waiting for a reply. Bob swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. The freezer. It was where all the meat was kept. He wiped his hands on his apron and took a slow breath. Whatever truth was hidden there, he was about to see it. 10. Bob stepped into the freezer. Cold air bit at his skin. Frost clung to metal shelves. He rubbed his arms and looked around. Boxes of pork and sausage were stacked high. Some leaned at dangerous angles. He reached for the nearest box. The cardboard felt damp. His fingers brushed over the label. It was scratched with a knife. He held it closer. Under the ripped sticker, faint letters showed an old date. 2 months past expiry. His heart thudded in his chest. He set it down and grabbed another box. Same thing. Scraped label. Hidden date. The cold bit deeper as sweat formed on his neck. He ripped off a sticker completely. Rotten meat smell hit his nose. Sour, sharp, wrong. Bob swallowed hard. His eyes burned. This wasn't a mistake. Someone was hiding rotting meat. Someone was feeding poison to customers. He felt rage boil under his skin, but he kept silent. He needed proof. And this was only the beginning. 11. Bob stayed low behind the freezer door. Voices drifted in from the loading dock. Kevin's laugh echoed through the cold air. "Did you see that old guy mopping today?" he said. "Pathetic." Brian snorted. "Forget him. Listen, I called our supplier again." Kevin lowered his voice. "Same deal, yeah," Brian replied. "Half-price meat. We scrape off the old labels, put on new ones. No one notices." Bob felt bile rise in his throat. Kevin chuckled. "That's an extra 1,000 in our pockets this week." Brian grinned. "More if we cut the seasoning too. Customers can't tell. Salt covers everything." Bob's hands shook with rage. He pressed his back against the freezer wall. Their voices felt like poison in his ears. Kevin slapped Brian on the shoulder. "Southern Bites is just a brand. Real money's in cutting corners." Bob closed his eyes. His heart pounded with cold fury. He needed to hear more, and he needed to stay hidden. 12. Bob pressed his back harder against the freezer wall. His breath came out in short, cold bursts. His hand shook as he reached for the nearest meat box. He gripped the plastic lid. His knuckles turned white. Memories flashed through his mind. His grandma grinding fresh pork at dawn. Her proud smile when customers lined up outside. He felt heat rise behind his eyes. Rage, shame, fear. His fingers tightened around the box lid. Plastic creaked under his grip. He looked down at the frosted container. Inside, gray meat floated in murky liquid. His stomach churned, but his anger burned hotter than his disgust. This wasn't just about bad food. This was about betrayal of everything his family built. He sucked in a sharp breath. He couldn't confront them yet. He needed proof. He needed a plan. Bob set the box back on the shelf, hands trembling. His heart pounded with a single promise. This ends here. 13. Bob stayed hidden behind stacked boxes. His breath fogged in the freezing air. Kevin pulled out his phone. He stepped away from Brian, lowering his voice. "Yeah," Kevin said softly. "It's me. Same order as last week." He paused, listening. "No, don't label them this time," he continued. "We'll handle that here." Bob's chest tightened. He felt each second stretch longer in the cold. Kevin laughed under his breath. "Relax. They're too busy counting profits to care about expiry dates." Another pause. Kevin's boots tapped on the concrete floor. "Double the shipment next time," he said. "We're running out faster than expected." Bob clenched his jaw. Double the shipment. Double the risk to customers. Kevin ended the call and slipped the phone into his back pocket. He turned to Brian with a grin. "Easy money, man." Bob's pulse thundered in his ears. They weren't just cutting corners. They were building an empire of rot. 14. Bob stepped out of the freezer. His hands felt numb from the cold. His chest felt numb from rage. He wiped his palms on his apron. They were slick with sweat despite the freezing air. He pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen for a moment. Then he tapped to contact legal department. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. "Southern Bites, legal, this is Rachel." Bob swallowed hard. His voice came out low and cracked. "This is Bob Walker." Silence on the line for a beat. "Mr. Walker, what can we do for you?" Bob looked back at the freezer door. Images of gray meat and scraped labels burned in his mind. "I need you to prepare an internal investigation," he said. "Quiet, fast, no leaks." Rachel's voice tightened. "Yes, sir. Understood." Bob ended the call. He stood there staring at his reflection in the steel freezer door. His jaw trembled with rage. This was just the beginning. 15. Bob sat on an overturned crate in the freezer. Cold air wrapped around his body like chains. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. He buried his face in his hands. Images of his grandma flashed behind closed eyelids. Her gentle smile, her hands mixing spices into fresh ground pork, her voice whispering, "Always feed people with pride." Bobby. He clenched his fingers tighter against his forehead. He felt small, helpless, ashamed. The freezer door creaked open. Emily Thompson stepped in. Her breath fogged in the cold. She froze when she saw him. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked softly. Bob didn't look up. He wiped his eyes quickly and lowered his hands to his lap. Emily walked closer. She saw his eyes were red and glassy. Her chest tightened. "Do you need some water or something?" she whispered. Bob shook his head slowly. His voice came out raw and low. "No," he said. "I just need a minute." 16. Emily stood in the freezer doorway. Cold air wrapped around her thin arms. She watched Bob breathe heavy shoulders, hunched forward. She stepped closer. The floor creaked under her shoes. "Hey," she said softly. Who are you really?" Bob didn't move. He stared at the frozen floor between his boots. Emily tilted her head. "You're not just some dishwasher, are you?" Bob clenched his jaw. A muscle twitched in his cheek. She noticed his hands. Rough, strong, but his posture was tired, almost broken. "Please," she whispered. "Tell me what's going on." Bob swallowed hard. He took a slow, shaky breath. But he didn't answer. He couldn't. Emily waited in silence. The freezer hummed around them. Finally, she turned and walked out, leaving him alone. Bob's eyes stayed fixed on the ground. Secrets had to stay hidden. For now. 17. Emily stepped out of the freezer. She hugged her arms tight against her chest. Her breath shook. Mark Peterson stood by the prep table. He was checking inventory sheets on a clipboard. He looked up, eyes cold and sharp. "Emily," he said flatly, "why were you in there?" She opened her mouth, searching for words. I was just checking on the new guy," she said quietly. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Checking on him." His voice dripped with disgust. He stepped closer. She smelled his woodsy cologne mixed with fried oil. "You think babysitting dishwashers is your job now?" he snapped. "Maybe I should cut your hours since you have so much free time." Emily's eyes widened. "No, sir, I was just..." He leaned in, his face inches from hers. "Listen, you've been sloppy lately. Bad attitude, slow orders. One more mistake, and you're gone." Emily felt tears sting her eyes. She nodded quickly. "Good," Mark said, turning away. Emily swallowed her fear. Inside, anger burned hot in her chest. 18. Bob stood in the freezer doorway. He watched Emily walk away, shoulders shaking. Mark tossed his clipboard on the counter. He didn't see Bob standing there. Bob's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Heat burned under his ribs. It climbed up his neck and into his jaw. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Fingernails dug into his palms. He stared at Mark. The man's back was turned as he barked orders to the line cooks. Bob's eyes narrowed, his vision blurred at the edges. A dark rage pulsed behind his eyes. Memories rushed through him. His grandma teaching him kindness. His father teaching him strength. Now he saw men like Mark destroying it all for money and power. He felt his heart pound harder. A single thought echoed through his chest. "This ends with me." He took a slow breath, unclenched his fists, and stepped back into the shadows. This fight needed patience, and he would wait. For now. 19. Brian leaned against the walk-in cooler door. He checked his phone, grinning at the screen. Kevin walked over, wiping grease from his hands. "What's so funny?" he asked. Brian slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Just checked my account," he said, his voice low and smug. Kevin raised an eyebrow. "Another bonus from corporate." Brian shook his head slowly. "Better. Our little supplier deal just paid out." Kevin's eyes lit up. "How much this time?" Brian smirked. $1,500, straight to my personal account." Kevin let out a low whistle. "Not bad for expired meat." Brian chuckled. "It's just numbers, man. Customers don't notice. Corporate doesn't care. Everyone wins." Kevin looked around, then leaned closer. "We should push for more. Double the order. Cut more spices. Stretch it thinner." Brian nodded slowly. His grin widened. "Yeah, let's bleed this place dry before the old man finds out." Behind the stacked boxes, Bob clenched his teeth. Each word carved deeper into his resolve. 20. The kitchen lights flickered as closing time neared. Most staff had left for the night. Bob walked into the freezer, heart pounding. His breath came out in sharp clouds. He pulled a small black device from his apron pocket. A pin camera no bigger than a thumb. His hands trembled as he peeled off the adhesive backing. He looked around the freezer. Frost-coated metal shelves. Boxes of meat lined the walls. He pressed the camera onto a top shelf, angled down to catch the center of the room. He tapped the power button. A tiny green light blinked once before turning dark. Bob stepped back and studied it. Invisible. He sucked in a cold breath. Tomorrow he would have proof. Proof to destroy every lie. He turned and walked out, closing the heavy door behind him. Outside, the freezer hummed quietly. Inside, the little camera watched in silence. 21. Bob sat alone in his dark office. The only light came from his laptop screen. He clicked play on the footage. The freezer appeared empty at first. White shelves lined with boxes. Cold air drifting in quiet clouds. Then Kevin walked in. Bob leaned forward, heart thudding. Kevin pulled out his phone. His voice came through the speaker, muffled but clear. "Yeah, double it this week," Kevin said. "Same payment details." Bob clenched his jaw. Brian entered next, carrying a box. He sliced off the expiry sticker with a small knife. "Easy money," Brian whispered, stacking the box behind others. Kevin laughed softly. "They'll never know. The old man's blind." Brian nodded. Southern Bites is our gold mine. Bob felt his stomach twist. He paused the footage, breathing hard. Their words echoed in his ears. This wasn't negligence. This was a planned betrayal. And now, he had proof. 20. Bob pressed play again. The footage continued. Kevin leaned against a stack of boxes. Brian sat on an upside-down crate counting cash. Kevin chuckled. Imagine their faces if they knew. Eating month-old meat for breakfast. Brian laughed loudly. They trust that family recipe garbage too much. Kevin's smile faded slightly. You called Randy yet? Brian nodded. Yeah, he'll keep supplying us the expired stock, as long as we wire his cut on time. Bob narrowed his eyes. Randy, an outside supplier, another traitor in the chain. Kevin shifted his weight and sneered. Bob Walker would die if he saw this. Brian smirked. He's already dead inside. Look at this place. They both burst out laughing. Bob paused the video. His heart pounded with cold fury. This wasn't just stolen money. This was a network of betrayal. And now, he knew every name involved. 23. Morning light streamed into Southern Bites. Staff moved between stations, prepping for the day. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the kitchen. Everyone gather in the dining area. Now. Heads turned. Kevin frowned. Brian wiped his hands on a towel. Emily stepped back from the fryer, eyes wide. Bob stood near the front counter, but he wasn't in his brown dishwasher uniform. He wore a dark navy suit, crisp white shirt, simple striped tie. His hair was neatly combed back. His expression was cold and still. Staff shuffled into the dining area, whispering. Brian leaned over to Kevin. What is this? He muttered. Kevin swallowed hard, eyes fixed on Bob. Bob scanned the room. His gaze was sharp, unforgiving. He took a slow breath. Today was the day everything changed. 24. Silence filled the dining area. Bob stood at the front, hands clasped before him. Kevin shifted uncomfortably. Brian glanced at the exit. Emily watched with wide, questioning eyes. Bob looked at each face in turn. His gaze lingered on Kevin, then Brian. He cleared his throat. His voice came out calm, steady, and cold. My name is Robert Walker, he said. I am the CEO of Southern Bites. A sharp gasp rippled through the staff. Kevin's mouth dropped open. Brian's face drained of color. Bob paused, letting the words sink in. For the past week, he continued. I've worked beside you. I've scrubbed your floors. I've cleaned your dishes. I've listened. He locked eyes with Kevin, then Brian, and today he said softly, I know exactly who you really are. Silence fell again. No one moved. No one spoke. Bob inhaled slowly. This was only the beginning. 25. Kevin's hands shook. He slipped his phone out of his pocket under the table. His thumb flew across the screen. He pressed it to his ear, voice low and urgent. Randy, he hissed. It's me. Listen carefully. He glanced up. Bob was speaking to the staff, eyes locked on Brian. Kevin turned away, crouching behind a chair. Delete every record, he whispered fast. Wipe the invoices. Cancel future shipments. Understand. He paused, sweat dripping down his temple. No. He snapped, voice rising. Don't argue. If anyone finds those contracts, we're done. Brian looked over, eyes wide with panic. Kevin held up a finger, telling him to wait. His breathing quickened. His heart pounded against his ribs like a drum. Just do it, he growled. Do it now. He ended the call and shoved the phone back into his pocket. When he turned around, he froze. Bob was staring straight at him, eyes cold, jaw tight. Time was running out. 26. Bob stood tall at the front of the room. His eyes were hard and cold. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers once. Two men in dark suits entered from the kitchen hallway. They moved quickly to Kevin and Brian. What is this? Brian shouted, voice cracking. You can't do this. Kevin tried to stand, but one guard pressed him back into his seat. Bob spoke quietly. Corporate security. You're both under investigation for fraud, endangerment, and theft. Emily stood near the counter. Her hands covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Bob looked at her, his expression softening for a moment. She saw something in his eyes. Pain. Sadness. and a deep, quiet rage. Brian struggled as the guards pulled him to his feet. Kevin's face turned pale, his body shaking. Emily let out a sob. She had known things were wrong, but never imagined this. Bob took a slow breath. Justice had begun. 27. Emily stood frozen by the counter. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Her chest ached with fear and relief. Bob walked toward her. His footsteps were slow, heavy with everything he carried. He stopped in front of her. For a moment he just looked at her. She saw the lines of worry on his face, the grief hidden behind his strong eyes. Then he reached out his hand. His grip was warm and firm around hers. "Emily," he said softly, "you've always cared about this place." She sniffed and nodded, wiping her tears with her free hand. Bob's voice was calm but full of quiet power. "I need people like you," he said, "people who still believe in what Southern Bites was built for." Her eyes widened. "Me?" He squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, you will help me rebuild this company." Emily felt her heart lift. For the first time in years, hope burned bright inside her. 28. Bob stood in the old kitchen. Faded yellow tiles lined the walls. The wooden counters were worn smooth with time. Sunlight streamed through the small window. Dust danced in the golden rays. He closed his eyes and breathed in deep. The smell of pepper and garlic still lingered in the cracks of the wood, a smell that wrapped around his heart. He walked to the counter and placed his hand flat on the surface. Memories filled him. His grandma humming softly as she mixed spices. The scrape of her metal bowl. Her gentle laugh when he spilled flour everywhere. A single tear rolled down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. Bob opened the old cupboard. Inside sat glass jars with handwritten labels. Paprika, sage, ground mustard. He smiled through tears. The world had changed. People had changed. But here in this small kitchen, her promise still lived. And now, he would keep it alive. 29. Bob stood in the quiet kitchen. His hand rested on the old wooden counter. The room felt warm, filled with silent memories. His voice spoke softly in his mind. Recipes change, he thought. Ingredients come and go. He closed his eyes, breathing in the faint scent of paprika and sage. But real value isn't in a recipe, his voice whispered. It isn't in the spice mix or the grind of the pork. He felt a tear slip down his cheek. It fell onto the counter, darkening the old wood. Real value lives in trust, his voice said, in the promise we keep to every customer who sits at our table. He opened his eyes. Sunlight lit up the jars of spices before him, and in the integrity we carry, he finished softly. That is the legacy worth protecting. Bob took a deep breath. His heart felt heavy, but it was strong. 30. Bob stood at the kitchen doorway. Sunlight touched his face. The old smells of spice and smoke wrapped around him like an old coat. His eyes narrowed with quiet resolve. His voice spoke firmly in his mind. Every person faces this choice, he thought. He placed his hand flat against the doorframe. The wood felt rough and real under his fingers. "Will you sell your family's values for money?" he asked silently. "Or will you protect them with everything you have?" Outside birds called in the early morning light. The world moved on, unaware of his silent vow. Bob took a slow breath. His chest felt tight but strong. Then his eyes darkened slightly, because deep down he knew one truth. This wasn't over yet. Somewhere out there, the fourth traitor still hid in the shadows.